This is the building we call the Annex. It houses our staff offices, youth lounge, and an event space that is available to book for community use. These historically designated Georgian-style row houses date from the 1850s and 60s. For most of their history, they were people's homes until they fell into disrepair and were boarded up in the 1980s. In 2015, they were restored in a project that won the William Greer Architectural Conservation and Craftsmanship Award from Heritage Toronto. The last group of people to live in these houses during the 1960s and 1970s were members of Little Trinity, who chose to live here in intentional community. There were separate apartments for singles, shared singles, and families. The occupants changed over the years, but there was, at various times, a focus on service to the local neighborhood, combined giving to the church's missions, group morning prayers, a weekly community supper and Bible study, and providing lodging and encouragement to a few homeless people in the area. Two of the people who lived here in the mid-1960s were Sisters Gail and Lynn Gibson. Lynn had been appointed parish worker for the congregation, and their mother was worried about her living by herself in the big city downtown. So Gail, who wasn't doing a particularly interesting job at the time, came along to babysit Lynn while she looks after them. At the time, the neighborhood was home to many low-income families who lived in inadequate, run-down housing. Lynn soon had organized groups and activities for children and some of the girls, but Gail and others in the community noticed that whenever we were out at night, there were hordes of teenagers just sort of lounging around. So, along with a wandering Aussie named Jack Folt, she started hanging out with the neighborhood kids in restaurants and the street, and they decided to start a coffee house. They called it the 409 Club because it was housed at 409 King Street East, a building that has since been torn down. The 409 Club ran through 1966 and 1967, mostly on weekend evenings. Coffee was served, no alcohol was allowed, there was a jukebox and dancing, and occasionally the kids would serve the after-church coffee for the evening service. The coffee house leaders also booked ice time for hockey at 2 a.m. and took the kids to the university settlement house to swim, and got funding to send them to camp in the summertime. Gail noticed that a lot of the boys couldn't read well, and Jack had a non-functional antique Rolls-Royce that he had parked in the backyard at 401 King. So, they started the boys working on a project to get Jack's car running, and got a bunch of Mechanics Illustrated magazines for the boys to learn to read. After a year and a half of taking the engine apart and putting it back together, they got that car running. The coffee house ended when the building at 409 was declared unsafe. But the members of the King Street community continued to be active in running kids' clubs and summer camp programs through to the mid-1970s. Now, the building again houses our Triniteens program, where about 30 kids, both from Little Trinity and not, gather for friendship and faith building on Friday evenings.